Hello, today we're going to talk about the passive voice part 2. The aim of this presentation is to introduce two additional passive voice structures. Passive voice with verbs which have two complements, which are direct object and indirect object, and then the impersonal passive. Let's start by having a look at passives which have verbs with two objects. As you may remember, when you want to transform an active structure into a passive structure, you normally need an object in the active sentence. This object will become the subject of the passive structure. However, in English, there are many verbs, such as the ones you have on the screen, give, send, buy or lend, which can be followed by two objects, an indirect object and a direct object. This gives way to two main structures. Structure A, verb plus indirect object plus direct object, and the example is, I gave my sister the car. As you can see, the indirect object refers to a person and the direct object refers to an object, to a thing. We can also have the second structure, which is a verb plus a direct object plus an indirect object. In this case, we have, I gave the car to my sister. Okay, remember that both structures can be made passive. This means that in some cases, the object of one of the sentences becomes the subject and the other one remains the object. So let's have a look at what happens if the indirect object becomes the subject of the passive voice. This is structure A. Indirect object becomes the subject. My sister was given the car. Okay, if the direct object becomes the subject, we have the following sentence. The car was given to my sister. So, which one do we normally use? Well, the choice between the two structures may depend on what has been said before or in a difference in focus. However, in English, structure A is probably the more common of the two. More additional examples are the following. I have been sent a lot of information. It is more natural to use this structure than to use the one with the direct object becoming the subject of the passive voice. A lot of information has been sent to me. If we have a look at the second one, when were you given the award? This structure is also more natural than the one with the direct object becoming the subject of the passive voice. Okay, now we are going to have a look at the impersonal passive. This is another type of passive. When we want to use intransitive verbs in the passive, we normally have to use the impersonal passive. Intransitive verbs are verbs which do not take an object. And as you know, we always need an object in the active sentence to make a passive sentence. So, the structure is the following. We have a reporting verb. They say that global warming will decrease if we take some action now. Reporting verbs are verbs we use to tell things, to inform people of things. Other examples are say, believe, think, estimate, consider, etc. So this is one passive structure, one impersonal passive structure. Then we have another one. It is said that global warming will decrease if we take some action now. However, apart from the impersonal structures we have seen before, another very common structure in English is the following. Global warming is said to decrease if we take some action now. Okay, so how do we arrive to this sentence from the other two impersonal passive sentences? Well, now we're going to have a look at the steps to form this last impersonal passive sentence. Let's have a look at the two sentences again. The first one, they say, or it is said, that global warming will decrease if we take some action now. And then, the impersonal passive structure, we need global warming is said to decrease if we take some action now. Right, step number 1. The subject of the that clause becomes the subject of the impersonal structure. In this case, if you remember, is global warming. Then, we have to make a change in the verb. The subject is then followed by the verb to be, okay, in the same tense of the reporting verb. If you remember, the reporting verb here is in the present, say. So now we have the verb to be in the present, followed by the past participle of the verb. said. Global warming is said. Okay, and finally we have step number 3. The verb in the that clause takes the form of an infinitive. Right. Now we're going to have a look at the choice of infinitive, because there are 4 main infinitive types. The choice of infinitive will depend on the verb tense that we have in the reporting structure. Right, so we can have the simple infinitive, to decrease. We normally use the simple infinitive when the verbs in the that clause are present simple and future simple. We use the continuous or progressive infinitive when we have present continuous and future continuous, to be decreasing. We normally use to have decrease when we have the perfect infinitive, past simple, present perfect, and past perfect. And finally we have the perfect continuous or progressive infinitive to have been decreasing when we use the past continuous, present perfect continuous, or past perfect continuous. Right, let's have a look at the following example. They state that some countries are already making a good use of renewable energies. And in this case, we have a reporting verb, they state, which is in the present simple, plus a that clause, that some countries are already making a good use of renewable energies. In the that clause, we have a subject, some countries, and we have a verb, are already making. So, after the transformation, the result in personal structure would be some countries are stated to be making a good use of renewable energies. As you can see, the subject of the that clause becomes the subject of this impersonal structure. Then we have the verb to be in the present simple, here, plus the past participle of the reporting verb. And finally, we have the verb are already making, which is a present continuous verb tense, transformed into an infinitive, to be making a good use of renewable energies. Okay, and now let's have a look at some exercises. Exercise 1. Write the passive form of the following sentences. Pay attention to whether they have 1 or 2 objects. So remember that in English we have said that it is more natural to use the indirect object to become the subject of the passive sentence. Sentence number 1. I have fed the pigs some grain. Number 2. Some environmental groups offered the government their help against pollution in their last meeting. And 3. Farmers from the region will give the mayor of the city a letter with suggestions on how to improve soil conditions. Okay, take some minutes to think about the transformation of these sentences. And here go the solutions. The pigs have been fed some grain. The government was offered help against pollution. And 3. The majority of the city will be given a letter with suggestions on how to improve soil conditions. So remember that the pigs, the government, and the mayor of the city were the indirect pronouns in the active sentence. Okay, direct objects remain objects in the passive structure. Some grain, help, and a letter. Now let's have a look at an example to transform sentences into impersonal passives. Okay, write the impersonal passives from the following sentences. It is estimated that carbon dioxide emissions will be reduced by the end of this century. People believe that the use of biofuels has contributed to reduce electricity. They say that using compost in your yard has always been a good way of fertilizing the soil. Okay, so to transform these sentences, look for the reporting verbs, look for the subjects of the that clause, and then change the verb in the that clause by the right infinitive. Okay, take some minutes to do the transformation. Here go the answers. Number 1. Carbon dioxide emissions are estimated to be reduced by the end of the century. If you remember, the verb in this sentence, in the that clause, was a future tense. So, a future tense is replaced by a simple infinitive. In number 2, the use of biofuels is believed to have contributed to reduce electricity. In this case, we have a perfect infinitive, because the verb tense in the other sentence was has contributed to reduce electricity, a present perfect tense. And finally, in the last sentence, using compost in your yard is said to have always been a good way of fertilizing the soil. Again, we have a perfect infinitive, because the verb in the that clause here was, has, always been. And this is all for today. Thank you very much.